G'day. I thought I'd try something new and make a video and talk to you. I'm enjoying making videos. You've probably seen the lessons videos that I've done with the loony cartoons. And I don't know, it just seems to be a really nice way of catching up with folk. And here on the pond, I really do want to have that sense of building a relationship with you all. And so this morning, as I was going from my morning frosty walk, with Mont Blanc on the horizon, I cast my mind to the discussion that we had in one of our catch-up calls, our coffee break calls earlier this month. And some of you might have read the post I put yesterday about emergent discussions. And it really was a wonderful emergent discussion where we just logged on, said g'day, and off we went. And as part of that, I brought up this notion of liminality. I've been thinking a lot about liminality over the last months, really. And part of that has been prompted by a lot of things that I've read where people break the world into dichotomies. There's good, there's evil, there's companies, there's NGOs, there's black, there's white, there's one, there's zero. And I've always found that somehow troubling, because I really feel that some of the magic happens when we bring those people together, the people who see themselves in those different tribes, where we bring them together. And this really speaks a lot of the experience of my work over so many years trying to mediate between NGOs and companies. And I used to use this word, this phrase, between two worlds. And that really came from a book that I read back in 1990 for the first time by an American professor called Linton Keith Caldwell. And he was an amazing man who had been involved in producing the first ever environmental legislation in the mid-60s as a result of Rachel Carson's work, her book, Silent Spring, that led to this idea that there should be environmental legislation. And Professor Caldwell had been part of that. And in 1990, he wrote this book called Between Two Worlds, Science, the Environmental Movement and Policy Choice. And he talked about how we really were in between these two worlds, where our rampant push for growth and economic development had really come at a great cost to the environment, and how we, at that point in 1990, we had some choices to make. And could we make those choices that would lead to a more sustainable way or not? And back in, I think, around 2011, I went back and read it again, and sadly, I learned that not much had changed. And I wrote a blog about that. It's a long one, but I might share it here for you folks to see it. But anyway, this is a long way of getting to this idea. I've come back to this idea of liminality, because as I've gone through my work and sat between companies and NGOs who initially really hated each other, bringing them into that space in between. And this is, I'll find a little definition for you of liminality, but it really is that space in between one and the other. And Winnie, who was on that call with us earlier this month, she posted a little post about that. I do encourage you to read Winnie's post about what this idea of a liminal space between what has been and what will become. It could be between two places, two things, this idea of that space between. And I've been thinking a lot about that, because I see people, as I mentioned earlier, writing about, we need to be this, not this. This is good and this isn't. And I find that it makes people form into tribes. And when they're in tribes, they feel the need to defend their tribe. And it blocks them, from my experience, of being able to talk to the other. And we get a lot of angst and heartache and differences emerge when, in fact, if we paused a moment, my experience is there's a lot of common ground. But I find myself doing it too, which is frustrating, because I try not to, but I find myself talking about things like resonance and dissonance. If something feels good, if it resonates with you, go with that. If it doesn't, don't. So I talk about resonance and dissonance a lot in my work. But another thing that we talked about, and again, thanks to Winnie and Anne-Marie who were on the call, we talked about moss and this lovely book by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I always look to make sure I get it right. I haven't read her book on moss, but it's a beautiful book and I must get it. But I have read her beautiful book called Braiding Sweetgrass. I've got it here. Braiding Sweetgrass. It's just such a beautiful picture. And this morning on my walk, I started thinking about this idea of braided liminality, because if we just look at that picture again, from my experience, when I think about one or zero, good or evil, you think about two opposing forces like this, and then there's a space between them, two walls. But I don't think it always exists like that. It's not always, two sharp objects. Maybe that's a human thing, because we have straight lines in our human world, but there's not a lot of straight lines in nature. And this morning I was thinking about the braiding idea, and braiding, how issues braid together. And I was thinking about how things braid and grow. And again, I'll just share that picture. It's just so beautiful, that braid of sweetgrass, which is a grass in North America that the indigenous Americans still use in a lot of their ceremonies and to make things out of. But this idea of a braiding of issues, a braiding of liminality, it allows space for other people to come in, for other ideas to come in. This idea of thing, as opposed to like this, and these two forces which shall never meet, and you've got to drag people into that middle ground. What if these issues revolved around each other in a braid? It gives us more contact points, I think, more opportunities to flow into a discussion and see where it goes, more contact with the other where we can explore things. So this idea of a braided liminal space came to me this morning, and it might sound all a bit nonsensical to you all, but just imagine some of the issues that we deal with in our life, where they all just get so complex, and they seldom stand as opposing forces like this. We perhaps picture them that way, but they seldom stand like that. Even this idea of resonance and dissonance, there's usually a bit of resonance and a bit of dissonance in some of these things, right? Sometimes it can be really clear, that's fine. But around that, there's a whole lot of ideas that interweave. And this idea of this braided space in between the braids, I believe that's where the magic happens. It's when we bring people into that middle ground, or we bring them together around an issue, that we can find a way forward. If people can come into that place open and ready to listen to the other, and understand that there's a long history. And I think this idea of braided space and braided ideas and braided issues help us understand that the braid has come from somewhere. You're not just dealing with that person at a single point in time. There's a history to the person, to the way they are. There's DNA. Maybe they were born that way. Maybe they've become that way. But it's not a straight line journey either. People have become that way. They've come to hold their views through all sorts of complex means. And I think if we can picture this braid of issues, of people, of nature all together, it might give us a chance to unpick issues in a different way. That's all I'm going to say about that now for this little video. I really just thought I'd share that with you. Try this mechanism out. See if we can inspire some thoughts in the comments. I'm going to put some there myself. I'll pop that little blog. I'll put some references there for people to have a read of. But just imagine this idea of braiding, of issues and ideas and thoughts and people and nature being all braided together as one. And that space between the braids, where there's no hard and fast position of yes or no, good or evil, black or white, one or zero, dissonance or resonance. Imagine if you were able to be in that place where everything existed, and therefore everything was open to exploration and unpicking. I think that's where opportunities exist for us to take things forward. This is my thought for today. Hope you enjoy it, and look forward to any discussion that you'd like to share in the comments. All right, cheers.